All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Raphael, and I work in the marketing department for ZL Tech. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for the webinar titled Cleanup File Shares for Governance and Privacy, today presented by ZL Tech and Microsoft. Now, I would like to introduce you to our speakers today. First, we'll have Kon Leong, co-founder and CEO of ZL Tech. Following his presentation, we'll also have Melinda Watts, who is the current vice president at ZL Tech and former senior vice president and head of e-discovery at Wells Fargo. Just one quick note, we will have a Q&A session following the presentations this morning. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function in Zoom. And if you have any other questions or concerns regarding the presentation, you can submit them to us at info@zlti.com. All right, so I believe that's everything. I'll go ahead and pass it along to Kon, and we should be good to go.
Good morning or good afternoon to some of you. This is Kon Leong at ZL Technologies, and the topic is a timely one, to clean up file shares for a whole lot of reasons, including for governance and more often for analytics. First off, a quick synopsis of what the file share problem is all about. It's high growth, it's uncontrolled, it's escalating costs and administration. And quite often the complaint is we don't know what's in there. And even if we knew what was in there, we couldn't find it. And that causes a lot of issues with regard to governance, obligations and compliance, litigation e-discovery, and more often now obligations with regard to privacy. In the US, we have the precursor, the CCPA from California, to be duplicated by all the 50 states soon. Now, what do we do about this? The typical response has been to perform files cleanup as an ad hoc project, and then repeat and repeat and repeat. And it's a little bit silly when you think about it, because you have a whole mess of documents up here, and file shares are known as the corporate dumping ground. So you go in and start an ad hoc project to clean up, order it, but then before you even finish cleaning up, the next file comes in. You try it again and again and again, and basically it's a challenge that's never really complete, and we're kind of fed up with the losing battleground. So there must be a better way to do this, and there a more systematic approach has started. At a high level, this is the process by which one goes about cleaning up files. It's a little bit too detailed to go into in this presentation, but I'll take the highlights. You first start off with trying to figure out what you've got out there, and you start with metadata analysis, a quick scan to tell you where the problem areas are. In metadata, for example, this is just to give you a sense of what you might look at. One is to find out how many NIST files or program files you might have, and a quick scan to see how many duplicates you have, how many of them contain personally identifiable information or private information, and take a look at other data such as the ones that have been tagged automatically or the ones that have been tagged by the user. If you want to do further analysis, it's very easy. Then you go into either the folder structure, very much similar to the ones you see in the Explorer and other software. You can click on a particular folder, and immediately you might see statistics with regard to that folder, such as the size, the storage footprint, the number of folders, and so on. And if you want to go look at the analysis based on time, You can look at which ones were brought in at what time. Is this folder primarily comprised of new files or very old files? How often were they accessed and so forth? And then you can go in further and say, okay, what type of files were there? How many do I have of them? Is it mostly MPEG files, for example? And then also to figure out which ones are taking up much of the storage space. In this case, it's categorized by size. And here there's a category called gigantic files. Take a further look at it. And among the gigantic files, this is how they're distributed by size. And if you wanted to go further in, you can go into more detail, such as go into the actual files themselves, so you can actually see the size and actually pull out the file in question to see what's in there. After you do that, you've scanned and seen where your issues are, then you can do a much closer search and do some reporting on it. And for search, you can have varying levels of searches. One could be by data, by date, to see which ones are how old. You can do it by year, by quarter, by type of files. Or you can go deeper and say, okay, I want to see which particular files. For example, here it says, find me all files that have this text in their name. Or if you want to go further in, you can have the most advanced level, which is more like an e-discovery search, which includes a full text search, including pattern recognition. This is very similar to your e-discovery searches. After you've found the files, then you tag them. So for further use, and tagging can look like this, where you have, for example, you can do automated. There are three ways of tagging. One is automatic classification, which is necessary because the volume of data is too much. You can also have manual tagging for certain types of information, and of course a human override in case there are some mistakes in the automatic classification. And there has to be a machine learning algorithm to learn more and more as you override and correct for mistakes. These days, all three are necessary to work. And then once you highlight the ones that you want, you can take a look at your tags. Here, if you say, I want to list all of these under marketing, then from that point onwards, whenever the document comes up, it'll be displaying the marketing tag. Of course, there is no limit on the number of tags you can have per file. And having tagged them, you can now have action or remediation, such as, for example, you look at the tags that you have and you say, of these, I want all the low value ones, for example, the redundant or obsolete or transient files and so forth, and say, I want to delete them. And it's as simple as that. Or you can go look at the more valuable data, such as PII, those that contain private information, confidential or R&D documents, and say, I want to move these into a quarantine or an archive, like so. And it's done. After the tagging and the remediation, take a look at what we've done. And if you look at the previous example where you had a whole pile of stuff, yes, you go through the same process, you clean up, like so. But here's where we part ways. After you clean up the first time, you put it under continuous governance, like so. In effect, you're creating a library that makes sure that all of the books are up to date and ready for use. So once you apply governance, you never really have to do a cleanup process ever again. And of course, the data is always ready, scrubbed for use, especially in analytics or rediscovery or compliance. These are some of the more common use cases for file analysis and cleanup. I'll go through some of them. I think several of them may apply to your organization. First one, of course, is the point that's front and center of everyone's minds. That is the privacy and GDPR requirements, especially in the US CCPA. And I note that some of the concern now is even more skewed towards class action liability, even more so than from the regulators. Beyond that, we also have the ability to use this for examination of insider threats. I think most of the threat management has been focused towards the outside villains, but insider threat is a whole lot more difficult because everyone's got the authorization and or authentication solved. So this one's a little bit more sensitive. And of course, for those of us very active in mergers and acquisitions and divestitures, there's a need to identify and separate often commingled data after the divestiture. That's a legal requirement. And then e-discovery is well known. It would be nice to have legal hold data in file shares and to have the first call in record time, or being able to do that from the legal department itself versus going to IT. Migration is another common use these days. There's a lot of move towards the cloud. It makes a lot more sense to clean up before you migrate, because otherwise we'd be moving junk back and forth. And SharePoint cleanup, enough said about that. It's been a bit of a challenge to clean up. And lastly, aggressive deletion. This has been more among those who are highly litigated or highly regulated. However, deletion is not as simple as one might think, because you don't just wake up one morning and say, let's type in delete ****. The legal folks are very sensitive to this. Every deletion must be defensible, which means it has to adhere to an established policy. There must be proof that the policy was adhered to, and so on and so forth. Well, ask us more about defensible deletion. Now, for those of us who are now looking for a solution in the marketplace, a lot of users have told us that this is a very useful framework to use. And that is to, if you're evaluating solutions in the marketplace, take a look at how closely they map to your organization's needs. We found 3 axes for evaluation. The first axis is, does the solution cover all the data sources I need? Or is it just files? Or does it stop at SharePoint? Does it include ECM, such as FileNet and Documentum and so forth? Does it include IM and social media output and others, such as email and so forth? The second axis is, how deep does it go in peering at the data? How deep does it process the data? And there are layers of processing, like so. You can start and stop at the metadata level, which is useful enough. However, if you want to implement things like subject access requests for privacy, you do need the full text index. You do need to identify content and patterns. You do need to have an established policy, hopefully advanced enough to spread across the organization. And the last step is, of course, the most important, to be able to do something about it once you find the data. That is the most challenging. The third axis is, how well does it play with the rest of your organization's data management, such as, for example, is it only risk mitigation you're focused on? Does it also include talking to compliance or rediscovery or records or privacy, or to do analytics, or to do everything in one platform? This would be the culmination of data management's holy grail. you'll note that all of these kind of work in tandem. You can't really, for example, delete in one and not take care of the others. You can delete per privacy rules, but that may violate compliance rules, that may violate your business records rules, and that may violate a whole bunch of other rules. So it has to be done in tandem, more like orchestrated. Quite often when you map out your data or your data management requirements, you'll find that many of the solutions out there may not answer these requirements. In this particular case, we took a sample product out of the marketplace. The white spaces are not answered, the green spaces are answered, and the light green is partially answered. Now, if you're looking at just a very short-term solution to answer just efficiency or risk mitigation and metadata scanning, perhaps this one pictured here might be sufficient. So you have to map your 5-year, 10-year needs against what you see in the marketplace. If it is more encompassing of these 3 axes and you want more of this, then you might want to look a bit further. Data management across the enterprise is the way most organizations are going, but it's a fair bit of lots of challenges ahead. So what I'd like to share with you is what some have done in terms of going it one step at a time. For example, the popular approach to go with the simplest one, and that is to start with files management and cleanup. And that's really all you have to do. These are the common functions you need for files management. They also happen to be the same for all the other governance functions, if you notice it. After you've got this done, if you're comfortable with it, you can then add e-discovery. And here it's the simplified e-discovery that is reactive. Don't do anything till you get sued. You just have to add more data sources. And then once that's in, quite often they add proactive, quite often you add proactive e-discovery, which then allows you to be ready for litigation at any time. After you add proactives, you could also add records and privacy, which kind of go together. And then after that, since this is a lot of data, you do need to add storage management, including deployments in the hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, or on-prem, or all together. After that, some have added compliance, and of course, the final stage is adding analytics. We can talk more about analytics, but that seems to be a burgeoning space where all of this data under management can be analyzed for insights, not just for risk mitigation, but also to improve the performance of the corporation as a whole. We can talk about that in a separate presentation, what we see happening in analytics. For those of you looking at this, you should know that this data management, especially across multiple functions, such as e-discovery, compliance, privacy, and analytics, the need runs across all vertical sectors. For example, here you have many financials, but also manufacturing, public sector, retail, pharmaceutical, and so forth. It is a common need across all verticals, the management of information across the enterprise. The last thought I want to leave with you are for those who have an interest in the Microsoft infrastructure, in particular Azure. Here are some thoughts and observations. At the moment, the cloud data there's an active battle for that data. And typically it's between these two contenders. But that's over 20% of the data only. The other 80% is still TBD. And that's all the data mostly on the ground or in other clouds. What you need to do is to manage this, and that's where we can play a role, and that's to add information governance and analytics. For those of you already steeped in this, it would be helpful to have both archive, meaning make a copy and manage it, or in place, do not make a copy and manage the original in place. Both have to be there at the same time. One observation that you might want to keep in mind is the fact that when you select an infrastructure like Azure, you'll note that all of the fundamental homework you have to do, such as security, that's a huge series of processes and protocols to take care of. And you solve it once, you solve it for all if you adhere to one platform. However, if you have clouds that are proprietary, you would have to rinse and repeat for every function, such as for security and so forth. I know that for financials, that's a huge headache. So you might want to keep that in mind. What you do for Azure, you do once, and then you repeat for all the others. That concludes my presentation on files. I know it was a very short presentation. Do contact us if you want more elaboration on any of the points covered.
Great.
Floor to you.
Great.
Ralph?
Yes. Again, thank you very much, Kon. I hope everyone found that content useful and educational. While we're transitioning to Melinda's presentation, I just wanted to quickly remind everyone to submit your questions for our closing Q&A session using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And all right, Melinda, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your day. As we think about all of the different moving parts and things like that around file management and data management, as Kon has just went through with us, what we also going to bring back into is what I think the biggest majority of us live within is this risk appetite framework. This is just a sample one that seems to be pretty well used within the industry that PwC created. And when you think about the data management and the different components of what we've discussed today, it really falls into the section 3 of your operational risk on from a department product view as well as the business unit, and how you go through and understand those things and report up when you ask your questions. So when you think about your risk framework and your risk testing that you have to do, there are questions and things like that that come up, right? Where's your data stored? Do you have a risk mitigation strategy in so that you don't under retain or over retain your records? Do you have a defensible answer when you go through and you fill in your risk assessments? How do you know that you're answering it correctly, and that if it's audited, that you can go back through and defensively defend what you've put in there? Are you within your appetite and your thresholds? Are you testing correctly? And then as we continue to evolve, one of the biggest advantages is you are then able, are you treating your data as an asset? And does your data work for you? So those are all things to think about as you start going through this journey of governance and management and understanding where your data is and how it's used within your corporation. So at this point, we do have one question, and it is basically, a simple one. That's at what stage is your organization in the files cleanup process? And if you could just answer quickly, and then we'll be moving on. Okay, Raphael, when you're finished with the poll, if you could just pull that down so I can go to the next slide, that would be great.
Sure, you can go whenever you're ready.
It's like I don't have control right now. There we go. Sorry about the hang up here. So when you think about your repeatable, defensible positioning within your risk framework for the records retention and the reporting and the personal data assessment, the items that Kon brought up, what is also included is when you develop your workflow and your process to go through and identify and manage this information. What you also have is, based on that workflow and processes, you have the reporting that then gives you the answers to your format from your framework. So you can then understand and be able to answer your questions. Data management, as we all know, is on the regulators' radar. The views that and how you work through your data management obligations has to be rolled up to the corporate level and reported out. You also are having to report out to the first, second, and third lines of defenses within the company, who then has an obligation to go to the board of directors and the regulators. So all of this is a lot of work, as we well know, and very manual today. As we look at how do we improve our efficiency, and that efficiency not only being from a time perspective, but also through a validation and understanding perspective and accuracy, that makes this process not so onerous. We also need to make sure that as we're looking at this and we're identifying our records as we do our cleanups, that we are using our consistent within our file plan throughout the process, so that we can pull in those changes, pull in new file plans and things from that nature from a corporate perspective. And then as we go through, we then understand what the records retention is it on legal hold or not? And that's what can help enable your defensible disposal as you go through and understand where your data is and your processes are intact with the approval, so that you can defensively dispose. Then it also helps us to mitigate the non-compliance to the regulatory mandates. As we know, we've got CCPA, GDPR, the New York DFS, and more to come. I mean, when you look around us today and the world we live in, you know, once we come back to whatever our new norm is, you know, that very well could also bring back into focus new obligations that we have to adhere to as well. But then once you have your data managed, you can do your searches, you can look at your content. That takes you to the asset part. You can then use your analytics engine and go through and understand what your data is, make business decisions, and it's no longer just a liability. It makes your data work for you and helps you move forward as a corporation and as a highly efficient risk model as you move through that. Thank you very much for your time today.
Great. Thank you very much, Melinda, for that presentation. Again, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We'll go ahead and start the Q&A session. So let me go ahead and get that started. All right. And I did want to let everyone know that a recording of this webinar and the slide deck will be sent to the attendees within the next couple of days. So be on a lookout for that in your email inboxes. All right. And I think we have a couple questions that have been submitted throughout the presentation. Kon, are you able to see the questions?
No.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and relay that. The first question was, how does the model identify PII?
That's a function of pattern recognition and a whole bunch of other algorithms. And there's a set there's a starting set of algorithms that goes in and identifies the PIIs. Each organization will then have their own particular custom set to add on top of that, because PIIs may differ slightly from one organization to another. So it's very much a standard set first, and then a customized layer on top. Having said that, though, I do want to emphasize one thing that is often missed, and that is PII identification is very good. It's a very good start. But in terms of actually executing on SAR requests or subject access requests, it has a limited utility. And the reason is because PII or tagging PII does not associate the owner of that PII. And as such, you have to be a little bit careful to think, not be too optimistic to think that once I've tagged it, I've solved all the issues on privacy. It's only a beginning. To associate the owner to the PII is a much bigger challenge and requires a whole lot more search capabilities than people have been talking about in the marketplace. Ask us more about that. It's a fairly involved discussion.
All right, thank you very much, Kon. And another question we had that was submitted is, what are the most significant hurdles for the new privacy laws?
The new privacy laws, especially as they migrated from Europe's GDPR into the state-sponsored privacy laws, have a lot of inherent challenges that has heretofore not been addressed. In Europe, when they first stood it up, I was presenting in Europe quite often and had the privilege of talking to some of the regulators there, the privacy commissioners. It was not a very satisfying conversation. For one thing, they were asking for a lot. The infrastructure needed to deliver what the law said was not there, is not there, and won't be there for a bit of time yet. Two, even though I explained it to the regulators, they didn't really want to know about it, and I could say they weren't too concerned about it. So it's like asking an impossible task and then not really looking too deeply as to how one can comply. Nevertheless, the privacy regulations jumped across the pond, and now the US is having to deal with it. And I'm not sure yet how this will pan out on this side of the ocean. However, I have talked with many legal departments of financial institutions, and it looks like there's another area of concern that's raised its head, and it goes beyond regulators. I think now we're looking at possible class action, taking the privacy as a gold mine, and that unfortunately opens up a whole new front in terms of battling and risk mitigation. I think you'll see more and more of this as we go along, where this will start looking like another front to take care of for legal. And for some in financials, I've heard one or two express this threat as existential. So I look forward to a whole lot more conversation about this, where the concern in the US is less regulatory and more litigation based. So there are many, many challenges faced in privacy compliance. especially with the corporate side, the non-Google, non-AOL, non-Yahoo type environments, non-Facebook. Ralph?
Yes. And we have another question saying, can you talk more about defensive deletion? How could ZL help with being defensive?
Sure, this is Melinda. I'll take that one. So as we know, the defensibility around what we do for the regulators as well as our shareholders is critical at this point in time. And ZL obviously is a software tool, and through the automation, it helps you to understand where your data is and how it's being treated, and you can make decisions on those reporting and things like that. So with that being said, ZL would offer a session to go through the workflow, understand how you would do it, and then we would pull in the automation to ease that with the reporting so that you could then approve before you delete and with those customizations that you would need.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. And then we have another question just simply asking how and where do I start with all of this?
Well, I think the first step is always progress in a very long journey. The longer journey is really unified data management, similar to what happened to IT back in the 1980s, when the enterprise software platforms, ERP if you will, were all checkerboarded and siloed. In those days it was called best of breed, and you had separate applications for manufacturing, for inventory management, for purchasing, for HR, and so forth. And then in the 1980s, SAP and Bond and others came in with one platform for managing all that information. And it's never gone back to silos. The same thing is happening in management of data after you create it, especially for unstructured, and now more and more often, the melding of structured and unstructured data. So look forward to this convergence of managing for governance, the convergence of e-discovery, compliance, records keeping, privacy, and analytics. These are converging fast, and the next phase of convergence is already happening, where this unstructured data is now being managed on the same platform as structured data. So in the end, you might end up looking at something like out of Minority Report, the movie, where you control all of that information from one pane of glass, if you will. Now that process has already started, and I think even the big players like Microsoft and others are starting to move in that direction already. But from the enterprise's viewpoint, this is one heck of a project, and it's going to take a fairly long time to get to. But we don't really have a choice about it because of all of the patchwork and jigsaw puzzle of regulations, litigation, and so forth. I would say that the longest trip really starts with the first step. And the first step really, it's good to start with the easiest one, and managing files, cleaning up files, and putting it under governance is a very easy, much easier first step. Not easy, but much easier first step. And from there, the key is to make sure that you don't end up against a blind alley, and that there's a roadmap that takes you towards the convergence destination. That's the key, not to be stuck with a dead end 2-3 years down the pike.
Great. So thank you again, Kon, for that answer. I believe that'll conclude our Q&A session for today. Again, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for our Cleanup File Shares for Governance and Privacy hosted by ZL Tech and Microsoft. If you'd like to learn more about ZL Tech, please feel free to visit our website. That's zlti.com. And if you'd like to contact us directly, you can email us at info@zlti.com. Again, thank you again for watching, everyone. You have a great day.